All right, good evening. I'm Alex Stagg, the Canadian Director of the Sidney Hillman Foundation, and welcome to the 2021 Canadian Hillman Prize ceremony. And this is our first and hopefully very last virtual event. We missed our event last year as well. It was in the first few weeks of the pandemic when we were faced with this unprecedented challenge. And again, here we are doing this virtually. And I know I speak for many of you to say that, our party and celebration in Toronto is one of the most favorite events of the year. And we're sad that we're not doing this in person again in 2021, but our plan is to be back in person in 2022, and we look forward to seeing you all then. But this year, we are also going to be recognizing a really interesting recipient of the Canadian Hillman Prize for Journalism, and we have two honorable mentions. The Canadian Hillman Prize, like its U.S. partners, honors investigative journalism in service of the common good, stories that change policies and lives that make Canada a safer and more equitable place to live. And as we all know, this has been quite a year. The losses have been staggering. Loved ones and friends, jobs, incomes, beloved restaurants, small businesses and our favorite local businesses in our neighborhoods. We've all been isolated, depressed, missed so many occasions with our friends and family. But at the same time, so many acts of kindness, generosity, neighbors coming together, and creativity. And finally, I have to note a more sane government in our neighbor to the south, as Canadians have watched the tumultuous and unprecedented actions in the U.S. in 2020 and into 2021. And also in 2020, we saw some amazing and powerful protest movements led by Black Lives Matter in the U.S., spilling over into Canada and globally. Really a global reckoning about racism and inequality. And unfortunately, the pandemic has made inequality worse everywhere. And facing all of this and covering all of this is, of course, our journalists. Despite the dangers and challenges, they've persisted relentlessly, bringing us all the news and stories and that we so badly needed, and holding those in positions of power to account. Tonight, we get to hear from our amazing honorees, our fantastic judges, and from some special guests. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. First, I get to introduce Bruce Rayner, who is the president of the Sidney Hillman Foundation and a lifelong advocate for investigative journalism. I turn it over to you, Bruce.
Welcome to our annual Canadian Hillman Prizes amidst this terrible global pandemic that has given us all sad losses across society. But one loss in the United States that wasn't so sad is the loss of Donald Trump as president of the United States. That was a good loss. And so we are meeting for the first time at the Canadian Awards virtually and not in person because of the pandemic. And hopefully next year, we all expect to be back in Toronto together to honor Canadian journalists who are award winners. Since 1950, when Sidney Hillman, who was an immigrant who founded a union of men's clothing workers throughout North America, created this amazing union that changed the lives of hundreds of thousands of men and women in clothing industry throughout North America, and created a union that was powerful in the United States and Canada, and was an architect of the New Deal and one of the most amazing labor leaders in North American history. To honor him when he passed away, the union created not a statue, but created the Sidney Hillman Foundation, which honored journalism for the public good. And it was because Sidney Hillman was such an advocate and fighter for democracy that the union chose to honor Hillman with a journalism award foundation. And for 70 years, We have honored great journalists in the United States and Canada and all over the world who stood up for civil rights, who stood up for voting rights, trade union rights. We've honored them by giving them awards, by bringing their work to the attention of the general public, and by making them understand that when they do all this hard labor in creating stories and doing this investigative research, that there are millions of people that care deeply about the work that they do and support the work that they do and encourage them to continue to do it. Because the Sidney Hillman Foundation does not believe that we could have democracy without strong journalism, without the kind of journalists that hold political leaders, corporate leaders, people of power to account to the general public. And the way that they get held to account is by bringing the truth to the attention of millions of people. And in this era of fake news, even more so, we've seen the need for fair and investigative and tough journalists to hold powerful people accountable. In Canada, we want to give a shout out to Unifor, the largest public sector union in Canada, a strong ally of the Hillman Foundation, and the union that has sponsored Hillman for a number of years. So, everyone, sit back in your living room or wherever you are watching this virtual event, relax and enjoy yourself.
Thank you, Bruce, for your words and your support of the Canadian Award in particular. We always appreciate hearing from you every year. And now we're going to show you the video, which really is a great way to look at some of the past winners and some context about what this award really means for all of us. Here's the video. You can see that tonight's winners join a very special group of journalists over decades, a who's who of some of the most important stories of our time. And a critical part of the Hillman Foundation are our judges, who I'd like to introduce right now. We have Bonnie Brown, a long-term journalist, award-winning documentary producer, Tony Berman, who's had a distinguished career as a journalist, both for CBC and Al Jazeera, and a now columnist for the Toronto Star, and Garvia Bailey, an arts journalist and a co-founder of jazzcast.ca, who's hosted a variety of radio programs. Welcome. It's so nice to see all of you tonight.
Hey, Alex. Hey, Tony. Hey,
hello, everyone.
Hey. It's always good together, and I'd love to just chat with you guys a bit about before we start, about what's your take on being a judge of the Hillman Foundation? What does it mean to you? Maybe we can start with Bonnie.
Well, not to brag, but I am the longest serving judge now, and actually have be at every single one of the Hillman Awards since it started 11 years ago back at the Roundhouse down by the Lakeshore in Toronto. To me, it's just so unique and so special as a journalism prize because it isn't just for journalists in terms of the event. It brings together such a wide range of people, people from all backgrounds. There's lawyers and public sector workers and public interest workers and media people and journalists and academics and students and some good corporate citizens too. And they all share this passion for investigative journalism. So it makes it really, really unique.
Yeah, that's great. Tony, what about you?
Well, I mean, I think that when young people aspire to be journalists, I think the motivation for most is to do something good for society and to have your work actually result in positive social change. And I think the uniqueness of the Hillman is that that's the kind of journalism that's honored. And so I think those of us who are judges are always marveled year after year about just the quantity and the quality of stories and journalism that actually help society kind of advance a bit, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, and Garvey, last word on this to you.
Well, I'm the newest to the judging panel, and have really enjoyed interacting with both Tony and Bonnie, who have, as you said, such distinguished careers, and being able to look at this body of work from people that are also our peers and watch the way that they are using their journalism with such care and such a depth that definitely moves the needle as far as society is concerned. There's nothing better than being able to, at the end of the year, dig into these works and really look at them with a real critical eye, but also just marvel at what these journalists accomplish year after year after year. There's nothing better than that. It kind of is that confirmation that we individually are on the right track as far as career-wise. Like I love to get that confirmation that, yes, this is what you should be doing, and these are the people that you should be honoring while you do it.
Yeah, thank you. So well said. And I think this year we had a record number of submissions. So how hard was it to judge this year? Bonnie, you're the longest. So how hard was it this year?
It's really difficult every year. I would say this year, because of the pandemic, there were so many great and heartrending stories, and those ones presented a challenge because there was work done in so many different aspects of that, along with an incredible variety of completely original storytelling, which I was very heartened to see because we get a good number of submissions from local journalists. So we're always surprised to find out about these stories that kind of didn't make the national news, but that are incredibly well done and absolutely inspiring, I think. So for me, the big award is, of course, the big award, but the honorable mentions are an exciting part of the process too.
Yeah, great. Tony, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of obvious reasons, this has been an incredibly remarkable unique year for everyone in every level. And but I think as we went through the entries, one realized that how extraordinary this has been for journalists. In other words, the high quality that was produced this year was produced under incredible conditions. I mean, it was not easy. When you go through a lot of these entries, you realize it wasn't easy for these individuals to deliver the kind of public service journalism that they did. And because this year in particular, they worked under such dire circumstances, as we all did on so many levels of life, I think is kind of an added reason really to kind of be in awe, not only of the winners, obviously tonight that is their night, but for all of the entries. It really was a unique experience for them and for us as judges.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And Garvia?
Well, the question is how hard it is to judge. There's a lot of entries, right? So it really forces you to really manage your time properly as we work from home, so that we can actually get through the work. And it's not just reading. There are submissions that are television, that are news reports, and there are podcasts to listen to. It's a wide variety. But as I said, that it feels like a privilege to be able to step back from what we do and go into this work, because I think especially now during COVID, it's so easy to silo yourself within whatever it is you have to do on a given day or whatever you have to accomplish. So this opportunity to really take in the work of others in such a really critical and really in-depth way, because it's not like you're just reading through it like you do the newspaper, or you just listen to the podcast while you're really listening in a way that is a little bit more in-depth. And I think that that's a privilege. It takes a lot of time, but I felt quite privileged to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. It's such a pleasure working with the three of you. Thank you so much for all you do for the Hillman Foundation, and we'll see you all again shortly.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
So before we meet our honorees tonight, we're going to do something a little unusual. We were happy to have a special appearance tonight of last year's 2020 Canadian Hillman Prize winner, who, due to the sudden pandemic shutdown this time last year, did not get to be properly celebrated. So Garth Mullins is the host and executive producer of CRACKDOWN, a documentary podcast about the drug war, covered by drug users themselves. It's a kind of collaborative journalism that brings together community members, activists, academics, and journalists to investigate a life and death issue in their own Vancouver community. And Garth, your team investigated the switch, which was the moment the BC government, for minor cost savings, switched almost 15,000 registered maintenance patients from methadone to methadose, a substitute that did not work nearly as well, and sent people back to the streets. I know it's been an incredibly difficult time for your community, and I want to say congratulations again on such important work, and ask you what's happened in the last year with your podcast, your team, and your community.
Well, thanks very much. I just want to start by congratulating the winners this year. When me and my team won last year, we were just blown away. It's like an incredible honor, and I'm really happy for you all, and it's a good feeling. And you should take a minute to notice that. Our work is so all of our work as journalists is so frenetic that. Take the W. Just take a minute and notice this to yourself. I realized that last year at this time, the pandemic was shutting down the world. A year ago, everything was closed everywhere. Like someone had pulled the plug on capitalism for public health, and that was kind of an incredible thing for us to see. It was hard at the same time because me and my crew have been fighting a public health emergency for much, much longer that received much less attention, and you don't need to pull the plug to solve our issues. But as everything was shutting down, this prize, the Hillman Prize, was being awarded I don't think we stopped and all got together and sort of just toasted ourselves in the work. So make sure you do that. Since that time, things have gotten a lot worse around here. My editorial board has lost another member, Dave Murray. Rest in peace, Dave. In addition to Charisse Kiwatan, who we lost before the 2020 prize awards. So, you know, we live this. The overdose crisis takes members away from us, takes our community members, takes our friends. Through the pandemic, we planned memorials that we couldn't hold. We lost people that we couldn't grieve. So much so that when there was a little respite from various quarantines and lockdowns in the summer, we kind of held a big funeral march down Hastings Street in Vancouver. And at the end of it, we went into a park and we eulogized all the people that we lost. And we were there for quite a long time. And I know that we didn't talk about everybody. So it's been quite difficult. And this is not a force of nature. This is a force of policy. This is something that the government could stop right away. You know, all of the last year, the headlines were full of the search for the COVID vaccine, the acquisition, the contracts, the dispersal, the rollout. But there has always been a vaccine for the overdose crisis. We're all dying from contaminated, toxic street drugs, but there's a pharmaceutical version of all of them. And it's available in most pharmacies in Canada. The thing that keeps us from getting that instead of the deadly thing off the street is the rules made by cowardly politicians, maintained by cowardly politicians, at the cost of so many lives. In fact, 20,000 lives of Canadian residents in the last 5 years. So we're keeping on with the podcast. We're keeping going, but the Hillman Prize was a real shot in the arm. And yeah, I know that's a little bit of a pun, but as a drug user, you know, you're entitled to gallows humor when the rope's around your neck. So thank you for having me back, and congratulations to everyone this year.
Thanks for joining us, and best wishes to all of you. And now we turn to our 2021 honorees. And first, let's go to Tony Berman, who's going to introduce one of our 2021 honorable mentions.
Thank you, Alex. It's great to be part of this. There were so many superb entries this year for the Canadian Hillman Prize, but there were a few that were truly exceptional. And I'm delighted to place a spotlight on one of them, one that has earned an honorable mention from the judges. Special investigative reporting by Steve Buist, Katrina Clark, Joanna Friketich of the Hamilton Spectator focused on one of the scandals of Canada's handling of the COVID pandemic. The vast majority of COVID deaths have occurred among the elderly in long-term care facilities, with Canada having the worst record among the world's wealthy countries. The Spectator presented a series of articles titled House of Horrors that helped explain why. It exposed what happened in Hamilton's ROSSLYN retirement residence, where terrible conditions led to the deaths of a quarter of its residents from COVID. The residence was run by the Martineau family, but even though they filed for bankruptcy years earlier, they were somehow allowed to operate 8 more homes. In response to the Spectator's excellent and shocking exposures, authorities finally revoked the licenses of the Martineau-owned retirement homes. We're delighted to have Steve and Katrina with us, and congratulations to both of you. Maybe starting with you, Steve, how does it feel to be honored again by the Hillman Foundation?
Oh, it's a tremendous honor. I was fortunate enough to be the very first winner of the Canadian Hillman Award back in 2011, and so yeah, a decade later, that sounds about right.
Exactly. How about you, Katrina? What was your response when you heard?
Oh, it was a huge surprise, a huge honor. You know, both Steve and I have been working on this for so long, along with our colleague Joanna Friketich. You know, she's our health reporter, and she's done incredible work on this as well. So yeah, it's great to be honored. Thank you so much.
No, and I think one of the things that really is universal to all of us associated with the Hillman is a respect and an awe, actually, of the amount of hard work that it requires for journalists such as yourself to produce what you've done. Steve, help us understand how you first came upon this story. When did you realize that you were onto something quite big?
Well, we had obviously reported about the outbreak at the ROSSLYN home and the fact that it had been emptied. And then that's when we discovered that the home was in fact attached to the Martino family. And I have a long history with that family. I first started writing about them in 2003, believe it or not. At that time, they owned a chain of long-term care homes that went into bankruptcy, as well as their personal bankruptcies. And people were shocked back then, same types of reasons, poor conditions, but also the fact that taxpayers were left holding the bag for millions of dollars when the family went bankrupt. And yet somehow, even back in those days, 2003, that's what, 18 years ago, they still managed to hold on to this small chain of retirement homes. And, that was what sort of led us to begin looking into the family in greater depth and what was really going on behind the scenes there.
How about you, Katrina? When did you have this kind of gut sense that you were onto something that was bigger than just a normal story?
I think probably, I believe May 15th, it was the day that the home was evacuated. And it was a chaotic situation. It was clear that something was happening, but we didn't quite know what. And then public health held a press conference late in the day and called it a crisis situation, and they evacuated the entire home. About 64 people of the 66 residents there ended up in hospital. Almost all of them had COVID. It was just a quickly escalating situation that was so out of the ordinary. We'd had outbreaks in long-term care homes and retirement homes, but this was completely unprecedented.
Now, how about you reported specifically on the story of the whistleblower, which was really quite fascinating. And again, I think the power of your story collectively, the ROSSLYN story, was its universal message. I mean, it was crucial to Hamilton, but it was a story that one could see play out in many places outside of Hamilton, and dare I say outside of Canada. And certainly the role of a whistleblower is something like that. So what was your own, I guess, relationship with that part of the story?
So the whistleblower, Ashley Jenkins, she reached out to us in the wake of our reporting and told us her story. We had heard bits of it sort of through reports that had come out as the ROSSLYN had their license taken away and whatnot. But she reached out to us because she wanted to share, the details of what had happened, not only within the home, but what had happened to her in the wake of her speaking out. And basically, her story exposed the gaps in whistleblower protections and whistleblower laws in Ontario. And she lost her job in the wake of it, and she's still struggling. So I think that, she did such an incredible thing. And then the fact that she's, still being punished for doing the right thing is so troubling.
Mm-hmm. Steve, you alluded to, or you mentioned your history with the Martino family over a certain amount of years. That must be an amazing connection. I mean, do you ever run into them at any point? I mean, you must be on their, if not hit list, that's too dramatic a term. I don't think you get a Christmas card from them, I would think.
No, I doubt I'm one of their favorite people, but in some ways, though, that's really disturbing to me. I mean, it's easy to joke about and say, 18 years later, I'm still writing about this family. But if you really think about what that means, it's frankly shocking and really discouraging that this could still be going on for that many years. And it wasn't just the conditions at the ROSSLYN. We've heard and published stories about the conditions at some of the other homes owned by this family. And, it really should bother people that we have some of our most vulnerable people, low income seniors, living in places like this, and they really don't have any voice at all. I mean, sometimes we think of retirement homes as being these, and some are these nice palaces where, you spend $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 a month and you have, these beautiful facilities. But, unfortunately, in this case, these were homes that were lodging, low income, vulnerable people that, sometimes have some, physical health problems as well as perhaps some mental health problems. And really, who's going to speak up for them? And, I'm glad that we were able to do that.
And what was, I must say, as a reader of all of your reporting, the three of you, is that what was among the many things that was impressive was clearly your persistence in keeping your eye on the ball here. The Martino family was a central part of the story, because we often, as journalists, we have amnesia, like what happened a year ago is kind of in the past, but you were quite dogged on it. One thing I'm curious about from both of you, and maybe starting with you, Katrina, is what was that, as you look back on it, and 5 years from now, as you look back on this experience, what was the most challenging part of your reporting? What was the thing that maybe late at night you felt was winning the day if you hadn't kind of, as a group of three, kind of persisted?
I think it was just hearing these horrible stories and knowing that vulnerable seniors had been living in these terrible conditions. I don't know if that was the most challenging, but it was the most upsetting. Talking to family members in the wake of this, and it just felt so wrong. Getting reports and learning about, mouse droppings in the kitchen and black mold and this fuzzy dust in, walk-in coolers, and talking to Ashley, the whistleblower, she shed even more light on, she said there were bed bugs in every piece of upholstery in this home. And it's just disturbing to know that this can happen and happen behind closed doors. And I hope that our reporting, shed light on not only this situation, but I hope that there's more attention on, other homes, and that seniors don't have to live in these deplorable conditions.
Exactly. Steve, yourself, as you look back, what was the most challenging part of this for you?
I think the most challenging part was realizing how difficult it was to get people to listen. People who are in power and can do something about this. I mean, as I said, the fact that this could have gone on for 18 years, the ownership of these homes by this family. And really, it took us reporting some really horrific problems. And the fact that, an entire residence had to be emptied, when you, we think back in Hamilton to that day when they had to evacuate 60 some people. You can imagine what that must be like to have ambulances just carting people to the hospital one after the other, and the fact that it took all of that reporting to finally get somebody to stand up and act and, revoke the licenses of not just that home, but now some of the other homes owned by this family. I mean, I think that's the part that, sends a chill down your spine. Like what if there hadn't been that original outbreak back in May of 2020? Would we even be sitting here talking about this? That's the part that disturbs me.
Yeah, no, that's so fascinating. And that actually is an answer to what was to be my final question. And maybe I'll direct the same to Katrina, is that in the end, what was the impact of your reporting? Like 10 years from now, when you look back and think about all the hard work that all of you've done on this story, generally what we try to do is we try to say, well, we did well on this because we accomplished this or this or this. So what's your checklist for this story? What do you think the group of you have accomplished?
Well, I think sort of echoing what Steve said is protecting, at least not, I don't want to say rescuing, but ensuring that people aren't living in these conditions, at the very least, at this one home. And in the longer term, like in terms of the whistleblowing side of things, there's still so much that needs to change. And, like, I guess it's still on my checklist, but Ontario needs to beef up its whistleblowing protections. And without doing that, I don't know how the province could expect people to want to come forward and speak out about horrible conditions in homes like the ROSSLYN. And Ashley Jenkins, the whistleblower who spoke out, she played an instrumental role in this as well, in stopping what was going on at the ROSSLYN. So my hope is, I guess, that the province eventually fixes the gaps in the laws that exist currently.
Right. Well, this has been great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, and congratulations to Steve, Katrina, and Joanna in the Hamilton Spectator. It's great to see Steve again, who was our first winner back 11 years ago, winning a Hillman Prize. Now let's go to Garvia Bailey to introduce our second 2021 honorable mention.
Thanks so much, Alex. I am really pleased to recognize The Death Report by Cullen Crozier and Kenneth Jackson of APTN as honorable mentions for this year's Canadian Hillman Prize. Before I introduce them, we want to show you a couple of minutes of their work.
Like, I remember having to shop for her flowers, which she's gonna get buried in, the casket, everything. Never did I think that I would, have to bury my youngest sister.
In 2014, 3 sisters died by suicide within 7 months of each other. Each had one thing in common: a First Nations child welfare agency in northwestern Ontario, with Chittiwin Family Services.
I think we are all responsible for Sasha's death. I think we have to look at the big picture. We can't sit down here and point fingers at each other or other organizations as it's your fault how we got here because you were holding the buck. It's not hot potato. These are lives we're talking about. This is our society, this is our culture, this is our community, these are our children.
And it's frustrating because when you take a kid from a parent, you're taking them because you're supposed to be protecting them, and we're not protecting them.
Since 2013, 178 Indigenous children have died in the system. Of that number, more than 80% are connected to First Nations child welfare agencies. Autumn Windigo spent her childhood being shuffled from one foster home to the next. 10 different homes over 14 years. A lifetime at the mercy of the child welfare system. It's become an all too familiar story for Indigenous children in Canada, going back generations. Once Windigo aged out of the system, she wanted to give back to her community and help stop the cycle of abuse.
Because I see it happening so much. I was abused in care. I am healed from that. I actually forgave my abuser just so I could move on. But actually, when I went to youth forums, I heard other kids talk about them being abused in homes. There was this one girl who I came in contact with, and she said that she was being abused by her foster dad. And she found out 2 years later that 2 girls came forward and said that they were being abused in the same home. And she was questioning, why was I still placed there?
I see so much injustice. And many of us have been saying this for years and years. And many of our children have died.
It just shouldn't be happening.
The Death Report, submitted by reporters Cullen Crozier and Kenneth Jackson, begins with a chilling statistic. APTN discovered that 178 Indigenous children had died over the last 7 years with connection to Ontario's child welfare system. Of that number, 147 are directly tied to First Nation child welfare agencies. That's 82.5%. That statistic launched a 9-month investigation by Crozier and Jackson. But it wasn't just a statistic. The reporting was about people, communities, children, families pulled apart, and a system that had been failing in heart-wrenchingly tragic ways for decades. The reporters, with persistence, tenacity, a remarkable degree of care and sensitivity, told these stories and exposed the failings and negligence of not only specific care agencies, but of the Ontario government, which oversees these agencies. The story of the death of 3 sisters, Sasha, Shania, and Arizona Bob, all under the care of Wet'suwet'en Family Services, a First Nation-run child welfare agency in northwestern Ontario, or Treaty 3, forms the central case study in this investigation. But the reporters went on to unearth many individuals and their families whose stories of negligent care within the system sometimes span generations. Numerous breaches in standards of care for children and young people were uncovered through combing through records, both recent and historical, numerous interviews, just incredible reporting. What they uncovered were lapses in proper counseling, follow-up, records keeping, medical care, home visits. No one seemed to be watching and no one seemed to care. The Hillman Judges Panel was not only moved by the excellence in reporting by Crozier and Jackson, but by their trauma-informed approach to investigating the care system. Their reporting led to some corrective action on the Ontario government and the Wet'suwet'en Agency and care agencies across the province. The panel also felt that the reporters exposed a system that might have gone unexposed or underreported otherwise. Congratulations to Cullen Crozier and Kenneth Jackson. Cullen joins us from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and Kenneth joins us from Ottawa. Hello.
Hi.
Hi to both of you. Congratulations. We are so pleased and so pleased to have you here. I think to start this conversation, I want to know when, for you as reporters, you realized that this story was bigger than just something that could, live on a 5-minute newsreel. What was the jumping off point for you? And I'll start with you, Cullen.
Well, Kenneth would probably be the better person to speak to that. He kind of brought me in. Basically, and I'll let Kenneth say this as well. But basically, it started with this document, this basically 91-page child death report of Sasha, Raven, Bob. So Kenneth was leaked that document from one of his contacts, and he shared it with me shortly after. And, Kenneth and I had worked together in the past. We've done a few stories that involved the deaths of children in care. And the last one we did had to do with 2 children who died by suicide in a Ontario group home, in 2 Ontario group homes near Hamilton. So basically it started with that report. And again, I can let Ken speak to it, but once he passed me the report, I just never seen anything like it. Doing this job for the last 13 years, I've read coroner reports and child death inquests, but we'd never had a document that really laid out a child's entire life from basically the time she was born until the time she died. And it was all there in black and white, just kind of all the failures along the way and all the instances where Wet'suwet'en, where the government of Ontario, where any number of people could have stepped in and did something and offered more care and support to Sasha and her sisters, and they just didn't. And so me going through that report, I mean, it was just glaring. And I don't think I've ever highlighted a single document in like the last 13 years here so many times, just failures and negligence. And it was just really striking document, but I'll let Ken discuss that a bit more.
Yes, please, Ken.
The death report was based on an internal death investigation. So an internal death investigation is a very rare thing. I've been doing travel for 4 years steady. I'd never seen one before. Not like that. Not unredacted. It's basically like an investigation into a child's death in care and goes through everything. When I saw that report, like I've been working on child welfare for a while now, and everyone kind of knows that, and that's kind of been my beat. But this was different. I don't want to call it a game changer because I don't want to overplay it, but to me, it was everything I worked towards in one document explaining the system. And the worst part is there's so many of these reports. This is just one. There's many every year, right? There's these that's what's so kind of heart-wrenching, is that as reporters, you're like, holy smokes, this is amazing. Look what we have access to, look what we can show. And everyone in the system's like, yeah, that happens every day. That's the problem with this, is for me was, so how do we honor Sasha? We have her whole life story. We're not supposed to have this. No one's supposed to see these. Reporters don't get access to this on these documents. This is probably the first time ever. But how do we handle this with great care? And you said that, and I appreciate you mentioning that, because it was definitely at the forefront. But also, how do we prove that this is still happening at Wichita, the Family Child Welfare Agency? This is a 6-year-old document. We need to prove that it was still happening, or see. So while we're, working on our story, I am trying to check off, where the oversight now is. Did it improve? Did they get better as an agency? And as you saw, no, they did not. In fact, they might be, may even be worse, even though they say they're the best. If they're the best, we're in a lot of trouble. That's what our stories show. More than shows a lot, but that's kind of where to me the game changer was, or where it became huge, was the report and what we could do with that, and what we need to do with it.
In your notes to the judges, you wrote, "You need to consider this fact. Every person that helped us did so knowing they risked their livelihoods, homes, or connection to their homeland. This assumed risk was always top of mind." Can you tell me a little bit more? We talked about care, and it's so apparent in what you're doing. Can you tell me just a little bit more about the care that had to be taken in reporting this story and protecting those folks that are not sources? These are people and their lives and their communities. Can you tell me just a little bit about that? And I'll start with you, Kenneth, this time.
So I got the document, I think, in April of last year, and told Colin quite quickly that I had it and that I wanted to work together on it. So we had to figure something out. But then I was really quiet. We kind of went slowly. It took us. We didn't get up to Treaty 3 until the middle of September, and that was when we finally were like lifting the veil off a little bit, where they started to realize what we had. I hadn't said anything that we should have went about it. We slowly kind of released a little bit here and there because we were fearful of our contacts. Like, we kept hearing they're going to take kids from foster homes. They're going to retaliate against workers. They're going to fire people. They're going to do this. They're going to do that because they do it all the time. You're like, yeah. Okay, I've heard this before. But we got a front row seat to it. One of the First Nations under Wichita, and there's 10 of them, BCR, one of our sources, Shannon Stone, took a kid from her home. No legitimate reason for it. We were able to get it back within 2 weeks, but still, the damage was done. That child is going through a lot right now. She's very high risk, very suicidal, and she's struggling right now because of being removed again, even though it was the first time she felt safe in a home. And because of Shannon speaking out and trying to spread awareness, as an advocate, they removed her child from her. She got her back, obviously. But now, most recently, Autumn Windigo faces banishment as we speak. In the end of December, she got a letter from Chief and Council of Rainy River First Nation saying, "Any more of your continued attacks against our child welfare team, and we're going to kick you out. We're going to sign a BCR, Band Council resolution, and we're going to remove you from your home with your kids and your husband and from our community." It's called banishment. It's not an uncommon thing on reserve across Canada. It does happen. Generally, it's reserved for drug offenders and sex offenders and stuff like that. Autumn Windigo is a 25-year-old woman who's never had a drink of alcohol in her life, I don't think. She's an incredible woman. She'll say it herself. She's a child of rape, who grew up in care, was sexually abused in care, fought through all of that. She's 25 now, raising 2 young children, the first time in 4 generations, of her family to raise her own children not in care. And she's facing banishment from the community for these continued attacks, which we can only determine to be her speaking out. So
Right.
it's not just real; it's happening, right? This is not just a threat. Like, Shannon's already kicked out. She's not, Shannon didn't live there, but still, a child removed. There's others too. Everyone. I have a long list of people who want to say more than they are, and they can't because they're literally afraid of being blackballed, exiled, fired from a job, you name it.
Right. Colin, I see that that there has been movement since the report came out, since your reporting wrapped up, and I know that this is a continuous work. This is not the end of it. The end of this piece of work is not the end of this story by any means. But what have we seen as far as the impact of this reporting on this story since it landed? Has there been shifts? Has there been movement?
Yeah, I don't think there's been as much as we had hoped that would come out of the story. I know there was a few investigations launched looking back into the cases, but we had really hoped that this story would kind of just blow the lid off. And unfortunately, I don't think it got the kind of traction that we had initially hoped. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, like I said, the story, it's all there in black and white. I mean, glaring failures. We tried extremely hard to get any kind of accountability from Witchitowin, from the government of Ontario, any kind of answer. And basically, once our stories started coming up, they just went silent mode. Basically, they wouldn't answer our emails, they wouldn't answer our phone calls. The executive director, Lori Rose, just basically just stopped taking any kind of questions from us, any kind of answers. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is the amount of power that these First Nations child welfare agencies hold on the reserves and the First Nations that they represent. It's all tied in with their First Nation government as well. They're kind of part of the same unit. So kind of going back to what Ken said and what you said originally, just about the people that we spoke to and the risks that they took in speaking with us. That took a huge amount of bravery on their part. And I think, they were just tired of what they were seeing happening on their reserves, on their First Nations. Not just over the last couple of years, we're talking, decades. We're talking, the First Nations child welfare agencies, the child welfare system in Canada, as it relates to Indigenous children, is a direct offshoot of the residential school system, right? They're interconnected. I remember I had a discussion at one point when I was trying to make that connection in part 2 of the death report. Somebody had said, well, what does residential school have to do with the story and with child welfare today? And they're connected. They're connected. They're all part of the same kind of this intergenerational millennial scoop that's happened to Indigenous children in Canada for over 100 years now. So again, I was very honored that the people that we spoke to, found the bravery to speak with us, and my heart goes out to them.
Absolutely.
Do you mind if I just jump in? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to add in. So we know that, just to answer more of the investigative part of things, we know that files of children that we wrote about, excuse me, were pulled by the ministry, by the Ontario government. They reviewing, investigating files for all the holes we found in them. As far as we know, those are still ongoing. Some First Nations, like Rainy River, the ones who are threatening to kick out our sources, actually called in the ministry, which is ironic. Called in the ministry to review their team, themselves. So after some of our stories coming out, they called in the ministry. We're aware of Treaty 3 Police, which is a tribal police in the area, investigating complaint-based, complaints about Chittiwin based on our stories. The Ombudsman's investigating. A lot of people are investigating it, but the hard part is that Colin is right. These agencies, they will admit this. They have more oversight than they choose to actually exercise. They're a private entity, I guess, or a crown corporation, or whatever you want to call it. They're private from the government. They're not government run, but they're government licensed, and their government oversees them. But the government doesn't like to always step in and kind of tell the agencies what to do, particularly on reserve, as you can imagine, considering the colonial history. So there's also that impact. But the source is, this is not me, this is not Colin, it's not APTN. These are source driven. Like, these are people who are speaking out. People, and it's young Indigenous women who are rising up and going, that we can't do anything without them. That's what I want. The big takeaway from all this is that this is an uproar of people who are tired of seeing things the way they are, and they want it to change. They found an outlet in us, and like an ear that would listen, and a critical mind that saw the story. But really, it's about Autumn Windigo, Shannon Stone, Sarah Lorich, Sasha Bob, all of them. It's about, Sasha, in her own way, in my mind, it was meant to be told. That story was meant to be uncovered. Her report was meant to be found. In death, she might change things. But I'm tired of saying that, because I've written so many dead kids. But I'm trying to honor them. We're trying to honor them through death if we can. But there's some who are still alive, like Daniel, who is damaged for life almost because he has this rare deformity, and he didn't need to be that way. And it's like that way because of neglect and just completely forgetting about someone for, 15 years, right?
Thank you both. Thank you both so much for the time and the care that you take in the work that you do.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Garvia, and congratulations to Kenneth and Cullen in APTN. And now let's go to Bonnie Brown, who's going to introduce our 2021 Canadian Hillman Prize winner.
Thanks so much, Alex. It is a great pleasure to award this year's Canadian Hillman Prize to Grant Robertson of the Globe and Mail. It's for his outstanding investigation into the failure of Canada's global public health intelligence network, just when Canadians needed it most. There was a lot of excellent coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and on government's struggles and missteps to try to control it. There were, of course, the tragedies in long-term care homes, but also excellent stories about outbreaks in meatpacking plants, amongst migrant farm workers, and in other essential workplaces. There were also heartbreaking stories about the disparate impact the pandemic is having on the elderly, on women, and on marginalized and racial groups. But Grant's investigation stood alone. He looked not at the impact, but at the cause of the Public Health Agency of Canada's slow response to the emerging threat. And what he found was staggering. He learned that the expert agency, set up in the late 1990s specifically to track these kinds of events, had been rendered useless just months before the coronavirus emerged and began spreading around the world. Even though the GPHIN had played a crucial role in both the SARS and H1N1 epidemics, its scientists were no longer tracking virus threats. Some had been reassigned. Those who tried to speak up about the new flu in Wuhan were ignored. All of this led to delays in raising the country's alert level, in canceling flights and closing borders, and in mobilizing the people and the resources needed to protect the population from a deadly virus. Our population. As one of Grant's sources said to him, people died because of this. His investigation was enormous, it was original, and it was impressive. It also caused what I can only describe as a collective cry of anguish and frustration. It led all Canadians to ask, how could this have happened? Grant's in Toronto tonight, and he joins me now. Grant, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
In those early days of 2020, journalists asked a lot of questions about why Canada was taking so long to act. Were federal officials too much in lockstep with the WHO? Were they too concerned about offending China? But no one asked the question you were asking, which was, is there something going wrong here at home? What twigged you to that line of investigation?
It really began with one question, as so many investigations do. And in this case, the question we asked was, what procedures did we have in place here? Because as we all know, Canada went through SARS in 2003. And if any country should be prepared for something like this, we've learned the hard lessons from an outbreak. So what structures were put in place to prevent something like this? And it began from there, where we started to go back and look at the playbooks in place that should have dictated the country's response. And what we found was those weren't followed, and that a lot of the lessons from the SARS outbreak weren't heeded so many years later. And after that story was published, we started to have people reach out from the Public Health Agency of Canada, which is, of course, the department that looks after these sorts of things for the country. And they started to tell us there's a much bigger story going on inside this department.
You collected thousands of documents and interviewed dozens of sources in Canada and beyond. Was there a kind of eureka moment when you knew you had a story and knew how big it was going to be?
It's interesting. The initial outreach from the people inside public health, a lot of the scientists and people who work on pandemic preparedness, what they reached out with was concerns that scientists weren't being listened to inside the department, and that over the years, the scientific capacity or know-how for these types of things had deteriorated over the years. And, on a macro level, that was a disturbing trend. And I started asking them, well, what's a good example of this that can explain to readers what has gone wrong? And they said, well, there's something called the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, known inside the department as GFIN. And what it was an intelligence network that would look for early signals of pandemics. And less than a year before COVID-19 hit, they shut it down, or they shut down a lot of its capacity. They didn't shut it down entirely, but a lot of its functions that were designed to protect us, they shut down. And it sounded at the time apocryphal. And what it took was the evidence being brought forward to show that. And that was sort of the moment where it really dawned on us. We had people bring forward data, 10 years worth of internal data, to prove that this system had been silenced. And at that moment, it was a really disturbing story.
I imagine the GPHIN is a small but highly specialized unit of people. Tell me about the ones that you spoke to. Don't disclose their names, of course, but what was their experience working and living through all this?
It was highly frustrating for these people. If you can imagine, they've devoted their whole careers to preparing for this moment. This is what you've devoted your life to doing. And when the pandemic hit and they were in a department that had been so eroded over the years, it was really traumatic for some of them, because they watched things unfolding. They watched a response from the government and from Canada that wasn't as urgent as it needed to be, wasn't as fast as it needed to be. And I think it was troubling for a lot of the people inside, both the GFIN side of operations and public health, the department.
The Trudeau government is not a budget-cutting government. What have you learned about who actually made these decisions, and I guess more importantly, why?
That's been one of the very fascinating things about this story, is that so many stories are easily politicized in Ottawa. This one is almost impossible to politicize because it spans two different governments. Really the changes that led to this began a decade ago, first under the Harper government, which was a budget cutting government at the start of the decade, and started to bring in budget cuts that reshaped the department, but also started to reshape the department by bringing in more bureaucrats from other departments that weren't specialists in public health. And that was a real stealth change that affected Canada's COVID-19 response today. What you have is less scientific and medical expertise making the key decisions inside public health over the years, and more managerial type people in the department who the scientists told us didn't have an understanding at key times of the subject matter. So if they had an urgent message they needed to get up the chain of command, the basic understanding of public health wasn't always there. Now, over the years, it transitioned into the Trudeau government, and those structural changes to the department were kept in place. They either weren't addressed immediately, or some of the changes fit with how they wanted to keep the department going forward. So what we saw is this erosion of scientific capacity really solidified in public health as COVID-19 approached.
You mentioned earlier about the lessons learned from SARS. And even as COVID-19 was making its way to Canada, we heard federal officials over and over, and provincial ones too, particularly in Ontario, saying, we have nothing to worry about, people. We've been through this. We know what we're doing. We lived through SARS. We can handle it. Do you think the people that were saying that actually knew what was going on in their own agency?
It's a great question. There are signs that they did not, because it's a very good point. We had been through SARS, we had structures in place, but the erosion of public health expertise and knowledge inside the department seemed to have taken place over a number of years. And when the big moment hit, when COVID-19 hit, I think it caught a lot of people off guard that the capacity we thought we had wasn't there.
So let's fast forward to today. Several top people at the head of PHAC have been replaced with actual scientists. 2 arm's length investigations have been launched, and the GPHIN has been reactivated. Most gratifying of all, I believe we'll all be safer now in the future. But is there more to come? You're still investigating this story.
That's right. A year later, here we are, and we're starting to see signs of the problems with Canada's response early on as more documents come out, and as these 2 investigations, the Auditor General process and the independent review come out, there'll be more detail in that. So we're finding out more as we go. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said early on, there will be a time for reflection to see what went wrong with the COVID-19 response. And we've always believed that time has been from the beginning, to do it in real time and not to wait. And so what we're seeing is more of that. And I think it's important that, just as in SARS, 44 people died in the SARS outbreak. It's important that those people didn't die in vain. And it's important that the people who have died or been stricken or been affected in however many different ways from this outbreak, that didn't happen in vain as well.
I should ask you, before we go, is there anything that you would like to say to the Canadian Hillman audience watching tonight?
We were so excited and deeply honored to hear that we had won this prize. It's such a big honor for our newsroom, and especially in the year that we've all been through, it's an amazing journalistic honor. I think of all the reporting, especially on the pandemic, that's been done over the past year, whether it's been the reporting on long-term care, the reporting on hospitals and on migrant workers, for example, and the daily reporting from health reporters and the science reporters that we've seen. And it's 2020 was a year when, journalism, I think, really stepped up, and I think we're deeply honored to be, part of that. And if our work stood out, that's a huge honor, because there's been so much good work done. And we wanted to thank the judges and the Hillman Foundation for recognizing that, and it's been great to see the work of all my colleagues this year.
Well, it's well-deserved, Grant. And it is a shame that we had to cancel our event again this year. I know we'd all like to meet you in person and congratulate you. So hopefully you can come next year. In the meantime, once again, congratulations and good luck with your ongoing investigation.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Grant and the Globe and Mail. And that's it, folks. What amazing and important work we learned about here tonight. Please visit our website if you'd like to learn more about the Sidney Hillman Foundation's work. And thank you all for joining us. And on behalf of the Sidney Hillman Foundation and all the judges, we hope to see you in person next year.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Have a great year.